Hi, in this video, I will show you how language influences decision making and why it is so important to reflect upon our language. We will use a method which we call the iCue engagement process. It's a visual, a verbal method based on social psychology of risk. And we use a whiteboard, a virtual whiteboard, or just a whiteboard like you see right behind me, and I will explain to you how to map a story. Now, you can obviously map any kind of story on this, starting from a conversation you had with your child, all the way up to a risk management or a risk assessment exercise and an accident investigation, um, an issue you have with a colleague about mental health, you want to have a conversation. The idea is how we can make sense of another person's language and what their language reveals about their decisions and what's going on in their lives. It's um, it's quite simple. It's quite intuitive, and I will put more videos in the description if you are interested to learn more about how it actually works in practice. Before we get started, I just want to set the scene for this conversation. This conversation actually just happened a couple of days ago with a friend of mine, and he told me about a ship that comes to Amsterdam. And there are so as soon as they come alongside, they're supposed to pick up stores and provisions from the jetty, and they soon realize that the ship's crane isn't working, and so they come up with a plan. And the plan is that they will manually pick up all the stores from the jetty, and they form a chain. So they form a chain of seven people, and they start picking up the stores. And as they're picking up the stores, the captain is watching them from his window, and he sees that out of those seven people, there is also a woman seafarer. Let's call her Janice, and she is really struggling because they are carrying some heavy weight as they are handling these pallets. And when he sees that, he goes down straight to Janice and he says, "Janice, maybe you shouldn't pick up so much weight. Pick as much as you can." And as soon as Janice hears that, she loses her mind, and she immediately says to the captain, she says, "Captain, who do you think you are, and what makes you think that I'm struggling?" And so very quickly, the intention to help somebody, to offer help to somebody, turns into a very very, it's seen as an insult. And how this story makes sense, how to map the story, how to help people reflect upon their language, um, is the basis for this exercise. So let's have a look how we do it in the IQ mapping process, and what is it that we discover as part of this learning. Okay, so we have discussed the scenario already. Now let's go into the IQ board. The board, as I said, looks something like what you see at the back, but this is a virtual board. And I will not go into so much detail about the uh, the functioning of the board, because we've done several videos to explain what IQ is, and I will put a link to it in the description of this video. But just very quickly, there are four quadrants in this board: one, two, three, and four. The top two quadrants are reserved for words or the language that we speak in the physical space. So you have words that you can actually substantiate through um, observation, through facts, through evidence. This is all the physical words that we speak. So, for example, a steel plate, or somebody getting injured. But obviously, all the positive words go on the left hand side, and the negative words go on the right hand side. Negative words could be someone getting injured, somebody slips, there is a spill in the and something negative happens, which can be observed, which can be factually explained, right? At the bottom left, you have all the words in the headspace, which is words that we are that are psychological in nature. So sometimes you see something and you're excited, you're worried, you are positive, you feel low, you're anxious. That tells us something about the state of mind of people. That's what we call headspace, which is denoted by the words in the bottom left. And as people speak, they also give us words in the group space, which is the cultural words, and they go on the bottom right. So sometimes people would say things like, well, we did it like this, but they never understood us. So there's a lot of we and them, us and them. There is things like, well, I quite enjoy working with this person, or I don't quite get along with them. So what these words reveal to us is how we relate with another person, our relationship with another person, and that's the bottom right. So workspace at the top, words, the language in the workspace at the top, language in the headspace, which is psychological space, at the bottom left, and language in the cultural space, which is what we call group space, in the bottom right. So let's start mapping the story now. So the situation is pretty straightforward. The captain sees that the crew is carrying three heavy crates, crew members, and he comes down and he goes straight to Janice and he says, "You shouldn't carry so much weight." Right? And we try as much as possible not to use our words at all in this process as we are listening. We map exactly what we hear, the keywords. You don't have to write everything, just the keywords. Now, that's what we did just now, and we connect those words with arrow. Next thing, we see Janice reacting to it and saying, "What's your problem, Captain?" And as a result of that, you can already see there's a conflict here. And a conflict in the story, there is always a conflict, there's always a trade off, there is always a tension. And those tensions and conflicts and trade offs and compromises are what are denoted by a line with two arrows pointing in the opposite direction. It's just like a tension, like you pull a string, it is pulling in different directions, right? So that tells us where the tension in the story is. And there's not one tension, of course, there are many, many tensions in the story, but in this particular case, this is the only one tension, right? Now, the next thing is we try to put some meaning on this story. Now, you imagine doing something like this trying to find a root cause to this problem or trying to solve it through a complaints procedure. All you have is a checklist or a process in front of you. But because this is verbal and visual, and it's all in the open and it's transparent, people can see what meaning you make of it as you're mapping their stories in front of them. So as I mapped the story, I turned around to the captain and said, "Captain, by saying what you said to Janice, what you're doing is you're trying to solve a problem, and you're trying to save her life, you're trying to save her from getting hurt." And then I turn to Janice, and what I say to her is that the way Captain reacted to you, it looks like you felt out of the place because you were surrounded by six men and you felt outgroped. Am I right, Janice? Am I right, Captain? You could even give it back to them and ask them to reflect on what exactly they had in mind. And we'll come to that in a minute. But for now, I put my own words to it. And if I'm wrong, they would correct me. If I'm right, I will get their approval. And that's what makes it visual, verbal, relational, and transparent, right? All in front of us. So once we have given it some kind of a coding or meaning, which is we give it some analysis to that language, the next step is to pick up one of these icons. Now, what this, there are many, many icons like this we have, but in this particular case, what is happening is that the captain is reacting from workspace, which is the physical language, or he is coming from a workspace, and Janice is reacting to the captain in group space, and they're both telling on each other. There is no conversation, there's just telling on each other. So one person is in the workspace at the top and the other one is at the bottom in the green. So the workspace and the group space, a conversation, or hardly a conversation actually, is just telling on each other. So these icons are actually used to help people reflect on their language, reflect on their comments, reflect on their questions. Next thing, we use an icon in the headspace. And this icon with a person with closed hands at the back of his at his back is something like asking the captain to think before you even approach Janice, what do you think was going on? What did you make of it? Why were you even so keen to intervene? And by using this icon, I'm asking the captain to step out and look as it his own headspace, his psychological space. That as he was observing, why did he react in that way? And he would probably say something like, I can see she was struggling, but she's not asking for help. And yeah, I felt uncomfortable about it. And all I'm trying to do is making the captain reflect on his language. That when you jumped into it and you said, don't carry so much weight, what was going on in your mind, right? I'm using this icon to push him to reflect on his language. Next thing, I'd ask the captain that if you were to have a conversation with Janice, not a telling conversation, not in this space, not in carrying weights or not carrying weights, but if you were to have a conversation with her, how would you approach? Now, at this point, the captain will probably start to realize if he is culturally intelligent enough, which most people are not, unfortunately, but he would start to realize what he did. And through reflection, he would probably come to realize that she felt uncomfortable because she was outgrouped. And this was not a simple, straightforward solution where I could just go to somebody and say, don't carry so much weight. There's much more going on here. I'm disrupting a very delicate balance here between two subcultures that are working together, the male subculture and the female subculture. And I have to be very, very careful when I intervene. And so when something like this, when you're in a situation like this, and you are in such situations most of the times when you work in a cultural environment, you would not go straight in this space, and you would probably ask a question keeping in mind the cultural context. In this case, how can I offer help without offending either of them? And you could ask any question. It doesn't really matter. You could even just go in and say, how can I help you all? But going and telling one person who is already marginalized in that culture to say, well, you shouldn't carry so much weight is very, very is not appropriate, let's say. And there is a much bigger picture to this, which I've written in a blog, and you can read through it. But my intention in this video was simply to help you reflect on your language using and help you reflect on your language and how it influences decision making using the IQ method, using these icons. And there are many icons like this that we use, as you can see at the bottom end. Here we have one, which is how would you have a headspace to group space conversation. So, Captain, if you ask a question in this space, how would or how, if Janice asks you a question in this space, how would you respond to that question in the cultural space? So, how would you respond to a psychological question? Right? For example, if somebody comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm struggling," or "I'm feeling very anxious about working with so many people around me, men around me," you could, if you are culturally intelligent and you have to respond in the cultural space, you could probably say, "Well, have you had a conversation with any of them before? Have you spoken to your supervisor?" And so when you use icons like this, what you're trying to do is to push people from their comfort zone, which is always working in this physical space, and coming down and becoming a little bit more emotionally intelligent and culturally intelligent. It's a very, very simple way to do it. Of course, it's simple in the sense that it looks simple, but framing a question and framing a comment, a suggestion, an instruction, a conversation, either in the psychological space or in the cultural space, which is headspace or group space, is extremely difficult for most people. And it is difficult because we are so tuned to solving problems all the time. And sometimes solving a problem, like what the captain did in this instance, actually ruins it all. Not sometimes, most of the times, because you can't solve anyone's problems. All you can do is listen to them and help them when they need you. That's a good leader. So that was a very short explanation on or how language influences our decision making. Thank you very much for watching. There are many more videos like this, and I've put a link to those. If you want to see a video on, let's say, accident investigations, risk assessment, management of change, strategic change, they're all there in the library. You can have a look at that. Thank you.